Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today, we're jumping into some FHOA. Before we start, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and you can always change your mind later. But if you stick around, there just might be some tasty cookies in your near future. This story comes to us from Mo Panic. I sued my HOA and won. Let's jump right in. There seem to be a lot of posts about wanting to take legal action against an HOA, but very few actually do it. So I thought I would share my story. This is not legal advice. I've been in my HOA for 15 mostly drama-free years, until a few years ago when the HOA changed management companies. The new one decided that they were going to be more proactive on enforcement of violations. Not that things were going downhill, they were not. Everyone's home has basically doubled in value over the last few years. They are well maintained, nice, newer homes in a desirable area. The new PMC, Property Management Company, got the board to adopt new rules and regulations and new bylaws. The board has essentially been controlled by one old lady for about 10 years. I'll call her Karen. Karen has never liked me and about 6 other families in the neighborhood, and we suspected all along that she would use the new rules to target those she didn't like, which is exactly what happened. Sometime later that year, we started getting violation notices via email for stupid crap. One was for a package left on the porch, one was for a bag of mulch left out. No fines yet, but that came soon enough. Around the same time, we decided to paint our house. Part of the process to have the color approved is you have to paint a 3-foot square on the front so the ARC can look at it. They rejected it, so we painted another one, resubmitted it, and waited, and waited, and waited. They never approved or denied the second color, so we waited the 30-day clock to run out, after which you can assume approval. Then the fines started. With no warning, we got an email stating that we had been fined for having mismatched paint. Yes, they were fining us for painting the squares that they require in order to approve a color. We were also fined for having Christmas lights in the summer. There have never been Christmas lights on our house. This was likely an address mix-up. We complained on the HOA's website, but were banned immediately. So far, this was all done via email. But to appeal a fine, you have to send a certified letter to the PMC, which we did, but in the meantime, we spoke to a lawyer who specializes in HOA law. He reviewed our DCCR and all other docs and gave us this advice for the appeal. Just politely say that you do not think that the board has authority to issue fines. That's it. Don't get into anything further. That's exactly what we did, and the board was gobsmacked at our gall to question their omnipotence and our non-participation in their appeal. They upheld the fines as expected, which made our lawyer very happy. We also learned that someone else had been fined for having too many cars, and someone else got a mowing fine that was intended for their neighbor. This PMC was completely incompetent. Add a fair dose of malice from Karen and indifference from the other board members, and you have a recipe for a cluster F. What we knew, but apparently they didn't, is that HOAs in Texas do not have a statutory authority to levy fines. That power must be granted in the restrictive covenants, and ours did no such thing. There is also a law, CH 209 of the Texas Property Code, which, among other things, states that before fines can be issued, the HOA must send a certified letter to the owner, giving them an opportunity to cure the violation. They hadn't. 209 also states that all board meetings must be open to all owners, and any meetings where rules, regulations, or bylaws are going to be discussed must be noticed to all homeowners. They didn't do any of that. The HOA was 1. Levying fines with zero authority to do so. 2. Ignoring state law that dictates how HOAs must issue fines if they have the authority. 3. Adopting rules and regulations in secret meetings in violation of state law. 4. Changing bylaws in secret meetings in violation of state law. We had them dead to rights and everyone knew it. Texas also has a law that grants attorney's fees to the prevailing party in a suit about violations of restrictive covenants. This usually benefits the HOA, but can work both ways. Our fantastic attorney wrote a devastating but absolutely beautiful complaint. It was pure poetry, and I should have it framed. It was served on the board and the PMC. I don't know what went on behind the scenes, but I imagine it was pure panic once they spoke to a lawyer who told them they were totally effed. A few weeks later, we heard that Karen and a couple other board members had decided that they were just too busy to continue serving on the board and sadly had to step down. There was an election, and now the board is controlled by the very people who had been targeted by their BS fines. The HOA lawyer asked to settle. We asked for 1. Refund all fines, late fees, and penalties ever issued to anyone over a violation plus interest. 2. The PMC can no longer have anything to do with violations. They can only do administrative things. 3. Revoke all actions taken by the board in the last 4 years. 4. Add a term limit that prevents Karen from running again for 10 years. It doesn't name her, but is worded so that it only applies to her. 5. And of course, pay all of our legal fees. We could have gone further, but at this point the bad board members had fled the scene, so we would just be inconveniencing people who had been on our side all along. This was an epic smackdown of an HOA Karen who, because no one ever questioned her authority, had gotten way out over her skis, and it felt really good to see her smug butt crash and burn. But a few words of caution are needed. If the HOA had decided to fight, there is a 50-50 chance that we would have lost at the district court level. This is because in Texas, judges are elected and the HOA lobby is a huge contributor. Many district court judges will grant summary judgment against any homeowner regardless of the facts. We eventually would have won on appeal, but we had to be prepared to go the distance and pay up to $20,000 or more out of pocket, knowing that eventually we would get it back. And no, HOA lawyers do not work on contingency, and they are expensive AF. Another word of caution for anyone considering legal action: make sure that you have a lawyer who specializes in HOA law, not real estate law, not your cousin's college roommate who just passed the bar. The deck is stacked against the homeowner, and even with a slam dunk case, it could be ruinously expensive if the HOA decides to go the distance just to F you over. You are spending your own money to fight. The HOA is also spending your money and that of your neighbors and their insurance company to fight back. A large HOA could spend $100,000 plus and make you do the same just to make an example out of you. You need a lawyer who has done exactly this before and knows HOA law inside and out. At the end of the day, you have to weigh the cost and benefit of a lawsuit just like anything else. In my case, it was worth it because we don't plan to move, and this was the only way guaranteed to stop the BS and get the HOA back on the rails. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Breakfast Beers. It says, there are a surprisingly high number of HOAs that do not have the authority to fine owners, or that the authority to fine defines a specific amount that is decades old. At the end of the day, the CC&Rs must have fining authority in them, and if there is a fine amount, it cannot be exceeded. Our HOA was one of them until we got our CC&Rs amended. I'm surprised this doesn't happen more often. OP responded to this comment and said, that's true in Texas, but some states, such as Florida, have fining authority granted by state statute. In Texas, fining authority is only granted to condo associations by statute. The gist of these two comments is that you need to read your CC&Rs if you're in an HOA and know them inside out, because even if you're not having a problem right now, if you have one in the future and know your CC&Rs, well, it's only going to benefit you. This is the same thing I mentioned in yesterday's video basically, where we said that if you're renting, you should know the Landlord-Tenant Act completely inside out to save your butt in the future. A little bit of knowledge goes a long way, and if you can use that knowledge against your HOA, well, they might just back down, because if they realize they're going up against somebody who's informed, they might realize they don't have a leg to stand on. This story comes to us from Correct Campaign 3707. HOA next door tries to enforce their rules on me? Try again, fool. Let's jump right in. I purchased my house in 2015, not even a thought of an HOA in the village. At the time, my neighbors were the cemetery to the west, 5 acres of woodland to the north, neighbor's house 200 feet away to the east, and south frontage onto a secondary highway, with land dropping off on the far side. Ideal location for compromising hub's mentality of middle of nowhere, anti-social stance, and my wanting at least neighbors within screaming distance. Fast forward to 2021, land parcel to the north sold to some numbered company. Then the one neighbor we had listed his house for sale. As discovered after the fact, Mark sincerely apologized when he realized what happened. The same company bought his house and land in early 2022. They raised his house and outbuildings and applied for rezoning. So far, nothing concerns me. Well, they started subdividing the land for lots, applied to have road allowances and water services, no wastewater service available cause rural village. This means, to those not familiar, that they have to allow square footage on the lots for a septic system, which for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house is minimum 750 square feet, with a specific setback from the adjacent property lines. Also, the township I live has no requirements for fence permits, just height rules for the front line of the house, 4 feet, versus backyard, 6 feet, and you may not install the fence over the property line. And, unless agreed upon in writing prior to fence installation, it may not be installed on the property line, with the adjoining neighbor being responsible for cost and/or maintenance. Well, so far I have been given notice of 1. Variance application to have the 2 houses planned next to me to have their septic beds closer to my property line than township bylaw allows. 2. Legal notice to allow fencing to be built on the property line, with half the linear cost be assigned to 123 ABC Drive, my address. 3. Notice from the developer's lawyers that I, as an adjacent property, will be required to abide by their neighborhood aesthetic requirements, which comes down to rules on house, garbage, outbuilding colors, vehicles allowed on property, and colors of flowers allowed in publicly visible flower beds. Red, white, and blue only. Excuse me? I live in Canada. Red and white maybe, but blue? Yeah, right. Try again. I bought this house without deed restrictions. My name is Karen. I am the original 1967 version. My mother had a premonition about the bewitch I would grow up to be. Bring it on. OP added an update down below. It says, update, township council meetings are on the 15th of each month. Last night, I attended, as this was when the variance application for the development next door was to be discussed and decided on. Sat through 2 very boring hours of other township business when it came to the developer's turn to explain why they needed the variance. It came down to because the septic beds would need to be raised due to water table heights. Moving the septics further back on the lots would allow additional flat area between the houses and the septic beds so that future homeowners would have more room to install things like an above-ground swimming pool. For those not familiar, putting a swimming pool on a septic bed is a bad thing. First question council asked after the developer went through their arguments, any objections to this variance request? I stood, voiced my objections. These are quarter-acre lots. It's not a space issue, and wanting more room for toys is not a valid reason for a variance for an item that could have environmental impact on my property. Variance denied. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Rested Development. It says, I would be breaking as many of their neighborhood aesthetic requirements as I can. I would actually take it as a challenge. How about a fence made entirely of old cars buried in the ground so only 4 feet is showing? House painted in military camouflage pattern? Flowers planted to spell out rude words? Okay, I like the way this commenter thinks, but part of me here is also thinking, if OP had this property long before this association came in, wouldn't they be grandfathered and not under their rules? So basically, they could do whatever they wanted on their property. I really don't see how they could force them to be under those rules if they've been there for a very, very long time. Now, I'm sure some of you guys have a lot more experience with HOAs than I do, because I'm up in Canada, and honestly, I can't think of one that's anywhere nearby. So if you have any ideas on this, comment down below and let me know, because I'm clueless. This story comes to us from The Synoptics. HOA wants me to change my driveway of the model home. Let's jump right in. Came home from work to a letter from my HOA. It was noted on a recent inspection of the community that you are storing artificial turn in your driveway. Upon receipt of this notice, please take the time to remove this from the common area. No, that was not a typo from me. They want us to remove the artificial turn we are storing somewhere on our driveway. I surmise they are implying we need to remove a little strip of artificial grass that was a design accent from the builder of my house, Lennar. We're only 2 years in as first owners of this house. Basically, everyone here is a first owner in the 50-plus home neighborhood built in 2019. Yeah, my house was also the model home. We didn't change anything in the front yard. There's no way the inspector who lives in our neighborhood forgot he or she used my house as a discussion point of whether they should buy their own home. Just all around incompetence. While the HOA can legally amend the bylaws to not allow artificial grass for new renovations, they want me to renovate the design that was used to sell every house in the neighborhood with my own money. Talk about immoral. Pretty sure they can't do that. I wrote a very polite email stating that, while I don't object changing my driveway, as I don't even like the artificial turf, thanks to neighborhood dogs peeing on it on walks, they will need to finance the remodel, as I'm not spending money to change something I bought that existed before the HOA did. OP added an update down below. It says, update, the HOA rep responded to the email with one sentence, saying they're going to close the case and that they were sorry for the misunderstanding. They thought we were storing artificial turf in the driveway. What a waste of time. I'm a bit relieved it didn't require more conflict to resolve this, as I'm sure many of you would have liked a longer story. My wife and I think the HOA, or at least one of the inspectors, were just trying to see how much influence they could push. There's no logical explanation where anyone could have mistaken installed artificial grass as if it was on a Home Depot shelf. I surmise they wanted to see if we were pushovers who would avoid conflict at any cost, and change it to the way they wanted without questioning them. I don't know what other explanation there would be. Jumping down to the comment section for this one, there's one from a user called Princess Bride 1987. It says, many parts of the US are going through a massive drought for years now, and it's finally catching up to us. And your HOA wants you to not use artificial grass? Going even further than that one, if I were OP, I probably would have responded to the HOA and said, well, I have the model home for this area, and that was there when I bought the home. So wouldn't everybody else have to have artificial turf in the middle of their driveway as well? You know, because the model home does, and that's the one everybody looked at when they were deciding to buy in this area in the first place. I mean, come on HOA, you want petty? We can go petty. This story comes to us from Drop Bear Airstrike. What better way to say FHOA than to dissolve it entirely, right? Let's jump right in. So a handful of years back, a family friend used to live in an HOA. One month, the board sent a notice around that they had voted, without any resident input, to update the aesthetics of the neighborhood and required all street-facing walls to be repainted one of the 3 colors that they had chosen. Naturally, the residents were incensed that their dues would be used for what amounted to a demonstration of power and a vanity project. The HOA claimed the move fell under their authority to preserve the upkeep and maintenance of the neighborhood. However, while actually reading the bylaws to see if the board had the authority to enforce such renovations, one of her neighbors noticed that the HOA could be dissolved if the motion was brought, seconded, and approved by some fraction, let's go with 2/3, majority vote of all the residents. Fast forward to the next month, virtually all of the residents attended, which made the board uneasy because meetings were typically only attended by a handful of people who had specific items of interest they wanted to be present for. The whole crowd sat quietly through the agenda, and when it came time to open up the floor for new motions, her neighbor brought the handbook to the podium and said, paraphrasing, I motion to dissolve the HOA under Section X, subsection Y, paragraph Z. I second that motion. All in favor? The whole room unanimously aye. At this point, the board was spluttering, trying to figure out what had just happened. As job done, some of the residents had already started filing out. Apparently, it took a bit of time for neighbor to explain to the secretary the nature of the motion and the fact that the residents far surpassed the quorum and majority necessary for a legitimate vote. The secretary reviewed the handbook and told the chairperson that it was all according to the letter of the bylaws. The chairperson tried to bluster and tell the room that they had to come to order so they could discuss the matter further. Apparently, the neighbor told him something along the lines of, "Come to order to discuss what? The HOA meeting is over because there is no more HOA. We just dissolved it." I asked family friend if that was it. She said the chairperson ended up sending a letter around telling them that, "I recognize you're all very upset, but let's not make rash decisions," and that they could discuss making some changes to the renovation plans. But it was right there on the record. The HOA had been legitimately dissolved, so no one showed up or responded, and eventually the board gave up trying to regain power. This read was awesome, short, sweet, satisfying, and the HOA got dissolved. I love how the HOA tried to say let's not make any rash decisions after they made the rash decision to update the aesthetics. How did they think that was going to go over for them? Oh wait, they weren't thinking, and now they don't exist. Check out all 4 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.